Hi, everybody. Once again, it's time for Politics by Jake. I am Jake, your political host and commentator. And this is the episode for Saturday, October 11th. I should probably number these, I should take, this is episode number, well, I don't know. But anyway, welcome. What we do here at Politics by Jake, we do a twice weekly show for an hour. And I try to give you an overview of the things that are going on. And what we try to do is we try to do political education rather than enumerate all of the things that are going on, because there's just enormous amounts of stuff going on, and it's just not really possible to cover it all. And I know that you're getting it from other sources. I know you have other sources besides Politics by Jake. But we do the conceptual stuff. We do the educational stuff. We like history at Politics by Jake. We feel that history is the queen of all the sciences. And history is incredibly important because if you study history, you observe that things are kind of cyclical. You see the same things happening over and over again. And if you don't know your history, you won't know that something that you're experiencing right now actually happened before. And maybe it was not a good thing, and maybe it had a negative outcome, and maybe you don't want to repeat that. And so it is that there is the saying that those who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. So anyway, that's basically what we do on the show, and that having said, let's get into it. So you've heard me talk about taker states, and with regard to social safety net programs and just all the contributions to the federal government and the other programs as well. Not merely social safety net programs, but the programs that allow the government to run. And if there's a kind of duality here, you have what is known as a low information voter. And you've heard me talk about this. When I was 18 years old or something, some of the ridiculous things that I did, I was what you would call a low information voter. So you maggots who listen to me, and I believe in political repentance. I mean, you can see the light. You can say, as the person said, I was blind and now I see. And you can get out of your political bed in which you have been confined, and you can walk and you can do this. Because I was a fellow sinner like you, but I saw the light, and now I preach the gospel of political sense and sensibility on Politics by Jake on Saturday mornings at 1 p.m. and on Tuesday morning, or I guess Tuesday afternoon, or wherever you get your podcast. And one of the things I talk about is how you're being fooled. You low information, Craigslist people, and I'm not really trying to be pejorative here. I'm not putting you down. I'm really not. But I must be cruel only to be kind, as Shakespeare said. I'm trying to wake you up. And in fact, one of my mottos that I used to, when I was writing for Quora and Medium, was wake up, America. Wake up and see what's being done to you. And one of the things that's being done to you is that you're being persuaded. Because the people who vote for Donald Trump, to a great extent, not only there's some kind of problem with the ultra-left, you've increased Latino voters. You have people who have lived in the hands of Central and South American governments that have these people who call themselves democratic socialists. And these are people, like I say, in the Mexican and Central and South American countries who basically use the idea of, they're false populists. They basically use the idea of democratic socialism, which sounds really good, just like libertarianism. In the first instance, libertarianism, that sounds really good. But they basically, we're not talking about libertarianism now, they talk about the idea of democratic socialism in order to get into power. And once they get into power, they oppress the people. And we could talk about why that is and how that happens, and that would be an unhappy story, and that would be unpleasant for you to hear. But right now we're talking about something else, and nevertheless they do, and they oppress the people, and consequently, eventually you have these people migrating into the United States, and they heard the words democratic socialism. And they don't want any part of it. And they go to Trump. And I don't know why. And, Bernie is a good example of this. And I love Bernie. I mean, I love what he does. I love how he stands up. But he calls himself a democratic socialist. You have Zora Mondani, who's trying for the New York and the New York mayoralty. They've had Eric Adams, and obviously corrupt, obviously on the tick politician who had to get dispensation from Donald Trump in order to continue his mayoralty. And he's bought, he's paid for, everybody knows it's a bad joke, it's a hiss, it's a byword. So there you have the Muslim Brotherhood, which is kind of a funky organization, referring to Mamdani. Stay with me. They want to install a situation where, and I used to listen, and I still do. I really still kind of do. But I listen to these backward states. I'm sorry, they're politically backwards. Their reaction, they're like Oklahoma and Arkansas and places like that, where they have resolutions that there will not be any Sharia law. And they do stuff like this. They waste the people's time. They waste the people's money doing stuff like this because they're dealing with low information voters. They don't listen to Politics by Jake. And they don't know that there's no way that Sharia law could be instituted in the United States. Why? Because of the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. And the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution of the United States, which is found in Article 6, Clause 2, establishes that the Constitution and federal laws made pursuant to it and treaties made under the authority of the United States constitute the supreme law of the land. And thus, they take priority over any conflicting state laws. It provides that the state courts are bound by and state constitutions subordinate to this supreme law. Federal statutes and treaties, which are a part of this, must be within the parameters of the Constitution. They must be pursuant to the federal government's enumerated powers and not violate other constitutional limits on federal power, such as the Bill of Rights. Of particular interest would be the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which states that the federal government has only those powers that are delegated to it by the Constitution. So there could never be any Sharia law. But this is what you are afflicted with. You are afflicted with legislators who are backwards, who are reactionary, and absolutely, positively, in some cases, fascist, and we talk about on this show also. And there's so much to talk about. So you excuse me if I don't digress and explain to you why some of your state legislators are fascist and why they're all reactionary. Reactionary just means backwards. Reactionary just means you believe that women really shouldn't have never been given the vote and that ought to be taken away. That's backwards. That's reactionary. You think that it was just a shame that the federal government gave citizenship and gave rights to the African slaves and that shouldn't be done and that, slavery wasn't so bad. That's backwards. That's reactionary. Many of these flyover states, many of these taker states are infested with credulous, easily led people who are ignorant of the laws and principles that govern this country, and they fall prey to things like this. So, okay, and I have discussions with my sons about this, but you have the Muslim Brotherhood, which is really a kind of a funky organization. They want to install a situation where if they were in Egypt, and they were the ones behind Morsi. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. And now we're back. Now, let's talk about Mohammed Morsi, and this all goes to the whole concept of Sharia law in backward states, and they are backwards, like Oklahoma, like Arkansas, who waste the money, and they waste the time, of the citizens of those states who pay for them to be in the legislature, and they're elected, but once they get there, they get a salary and they get other privileges and other entitlements, who waste it doing things like this. But let me tell you a little bit about where this comes from. In order to understand Mohammed Morsi, you have to understand Hosni Mubarak. And this all has to do with it. When you know where Sharia law comes from, and it comes from the Muslim Brotherhood. And they are a transnational Sunni Islamist organization founded in Egypt by Islamic scholar, imam, and school teacher Hassan al-Banna in 1928. And the reasons why this happened is because when Ataturk came in and had this just enormous secular influence over all of the Arab states, this was basically the end of the caliphate. And the caliphate had existed ever since the fall of Constantinople in 1453. So this was around for nearly 500 years. I mean, this was really a long time. And there were talks. People were desperate in Christendom, and they said, who is going to stand up against the Muslims? And then you get into the idea of the Third Rome, and that's supposed to be Moscow. Moscow is supposed to be the Third Rome. But the Muslim Brotherhood is a reaction. It's reactionary. It's backwards. It wants to, it's among other things, and we're really not even here to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, except just to give you an idea, because we're going to come back to New York City here. But in order to do that, we have to go back into the past of the 20th century a little bit. And actually, we have to go back to 1453. We already did that, so we're moving forward to 1928. And the whole idea was to bring back the caliphate. And the caliphate, you have to understand, is a worldwide organization. For the Muslim Brotherhood, all of the other states in the world, not merely the Arab ones, not merely Qatar or Qatar or Saudi Arabia or any of these other places, they don't exist to the Muslim Brotherhood. It's all part of the caliphate and needs to be subdued. And they're quite serious about this. They're quite serious about this. Egypt is one of them, for example. They all need to be subdued, and there needs to be the caliphate, which is the way it was from 1453 on to the fall of the Ottoman Empire in around, 1919, because they were defeated in World War I. There's that famous movie, Lawrence of Arabia, that talks about that. Great movie, Peter O'Toole. You ought to watch it. It's tremendously done, and it explains all of that I just talked about briefly in passing. So that's what they want. They want Sharia law, and they want the caliphate. And the caliphate wipes out any secular state. And they're always operating, and they've been operating since 1928, and it would be a mistake to think that, and here's Jake being kind of diametric, here's Jake being kind of unilateral, here's Jake being kind of declarative, and saying it would be a mistake to think that the Muslim Brotherhood is just sitting around and they're just not doing anything. They're just guys who believe in destroying all the world governments. Come on, Jake. That's all they want to do, is destroy the world governments, and they want to institute the caliphate again, like it was during the Ottoman Empire from 1453 when they defeated the Eastern Roman Empire. Come on, Jake. You're just being too hard on these guys. All they want is those things. But, there's nothing to worry about. Why are you coming down? Give me a break. They're absolutely, positively dedicated to this. Their stated aim is the establishment, as I said, of a state ruled by Sharia law under a caliphate. And its most famous slogan is Islam is the solution. And you can see their fingerprints all over Zohran Mamdani coming back to 2025 and the mayoralty election. And this is why I've delved into history like this, because this is happening. You need to be aware of this. They are indefatigable, these kinds of organizations. They are what you call the loyal opposition. They never, ever stop. And they're not stopping, and that's what Zohran Mamdani is all about. His candidacy has the Muslim Brotherhood's fingerprints all over it. And the way this worked in Egypt is you had Hosni Mubarak, he'd been the president of Egypt ever since like 1981. And he was literally from 1981 to 2011. Mubarak has to step down during the 2011 Egyptian revolution. Once again, Muslim Brotherhood is behind all of this. And then you have Mohamed Morsi. And Mohamed Morsi is absolutely positively affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood organization. And the way that he got into power was basically they had the idea was one election, one man, one vote, one time. And that's basically how Morsi got into office. And remember, Egypt had been kind of democratic under the kind of oversight of the United States. Morsi was elected president in 2012 presidential election the way I described. He issued a provisional constitutional declaration that granted him unrestricted authority to legislate without the need for judicial oversight or review. So basically, the Islamists had taken over the Constitutional Assembly. They created a new constitution. It was presented to the president, scheduled for a referendum before the Supreme Constitutional Court could rule on the constitutionality of the assembly. And it was described as an Islamist coup, and that's what it was. And again, this is the Muslim Brotherhood. I know you don't know this, but I'm telling you, because this connects to Zahra Mamdani in the New York mayoral election. And we've really gone over time on this segment, and I apologize about that. I thought that I would be able to bring more connection to you on this than I was able to, and I apologize. But Mamdani and his friend Khalil, who he will not condemn, because they support basically Hamas, and they just won't condemn Hamas. And this is really a problem. So in other words, this is Mahmoud Khalil, and he refuses to condemn Hamas. There was an interview with CNN. He said, I'm very clear with condemning all civilians. It's disingenuous to ask about Hamas. And Mamdani won't reject him. It won't turn his back on him, considers him his friend. So this is really a problem. And you must be aware that when you're getting Zahra Mamdani, if he is elected as the mayor of New York, you are basically getting a person in who the Muslim Brotherhood has its fingerprints all over. And this is something you need to be aware of. And you need to be aware that far from being just simple regional organization, a simple think tank, really with no political aims, these people are the loyal opposition. They are continuing to try. And that's basically it. And this has been a long segment. And we'll end this now, but this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. If you think owning things in your own name keeps you in control, think again. In today's world, lawsuits, taxes, and predators are everywhere. That's why the smart money hides in plain sight. We help you to build legal firewalls, LLCs, land trusts, private contracts that protect your assets while keeping you invisible. Call Twain Consulting today at 310-997-2204. Find us on Facebook at Twain Consulting. That's facebook.com/Twain Consulting. Protect what you've built before someone else takes it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine being invisible to creditors, identity thieves, and lawsuits, protected and secure no matter what. Virtual invisibility uses proven business and legal strategy to shield your assets and your privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind, and that includes you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control today. Call 213-465-0639 or go to Facebook, facebook.com/Twain Consulting, and make yourself truly untouchable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And, the reason why you have this kind of reactionary stuff is because these Muslim states, these Arab states, they never had a great awakening of any kind. They never had a renaissance. They've never had an age of enlightenment. They've never had a king's age of reason. They've never had that. The things that developed in Europe that led to the establishment of the United States, those things didn't exist. Kings still rule them. They're basically all, and you have some examples where kings don't rule them, and they're just violently opposed to that. And you need to be aware of it because they're just not sitting in the background. They're just not doing nothing. They're intending, and it would be nice if they would just stay the way they are. But they have this expansive idea, just like Moscow considers itself to be the third Rome, just like Putin believes in Duginism. He believes in a doctrine called Eurasianism, and that Russia should be a continental empire. And of course, they're continental to the extent that they're on the Pacific Ocean on that side. But continental means that they touch both oceans. And what's the other ocean? Well, it's the Atlantic Ocean. And they have not given up on that. And Putin hasn't given up on that. And that's the hill that he dies on, as I've said before. He's not going to change. That's what he believes. So you have a lot of expansionists. You have a lot of, really kind of a fanatical people. But getting back to this, all of those states are medieval. They're like medieval monarchies. They happen to have a lot of oil, and they have a lot of sand, but they've been able to parlay this into national and regional and world power. I was just listening to someone talking on radio, talking about how they're reluctant with regard to the United States having a role as a negotiator and a mediator in this situation with the Palestinian people, but it's really Hamas. The Palestinian people are hostages to Hamas, and we've talked about that on the show also. So in this peace deal that supposedly is happening, Hamas basically hates, Hamas basically hates their own people and cruelly and viciously uses them. They want to see dead Palestinians. That is their theory and their strategy in order to advance the things that they want to do. And so this commentator was saying, well, they basically hate the Palestinian people. In the United States does not hate the Palestinian people. The United States hates a provocateur like Hamas because they control and they hold the Palestinian people hostage, and they won't surrender. Hamas, among other things, when they attacked Israel on October 7th, they had no plan. It was almost like a photo op. They had no plan for the defense of the people. They had no plan to provide for the people. As I said, they cruelly used and oppressed the people, and the Palestinian people know this. The children know it. There's some great clips on YouTube about the children talking about Hamas and how they feel about Hamas. Hamas has been responsible for the destruction of Gaza and that whole area. Hamas has lost about 80%, I would say, of its territory, but they won't stop fighting. And when you're in a war and you're a responsible party, you're a halfway responsible party, and you're beaten, you should know that you're beaten. And the responsible thing to do is to sue for peace. The responsible thing to do is to ask for a ceasefire or for a truce. The responsible thing to do is to stack arms, sue for peace, and go home. But this is something Hamas would not do. They prefer the deaths of their own people on the world stage in order to plead and make their case. And this is something that's, simply unacceptable. Now, okay, moving away from that, let's talk about this situation with the shutdown. Many things going on. It's basically performative. You should absolutely blame Democrats for this, but you should blame them in an enlightened way and to understand why to blame them after the fact, because they didn't do the things in 2024. Biden should have, and we might excuse Joe Biden because there was basically a palace coup with him where the corporate Democrats, led by Barack Obama, led by Nancy Pelosi, basically said, look, you get out of the race. And they instituted somebody else who, couldn't win. She came close, Harris just missed the popular vote by, like, at the very best, 1.5%. And so I think Biden may have been shocked. I think maybe he was threatened. But after the Supreme Court gave the decision on executive immunity, Biden should have had Trump arrested and Miller arrested and Bannon and arrested the others on suspicion or on the grounds that they committed a 14th Amendment Section 3 violation. And that is the committing of an insurrection against the United States, which is the promulgation, the conspiracy is to incite a violent legislative rebellion against the United States and the other causes of action. Also, which I don't need to get into, based on the fact that such a person and his hangers-on and his coterie and his cabal are a clear and present danger to the United States. He's acting under his duty and his powers as the president, and he should put them in Guantanamo or something like that and let them be tried there and let them cool their heels there for a while. But he didn't do it. There is this misbegotten idea of that it's important to let the people decide. And this is how it was excused. And there's a rot in America. And it's sitting in our legislative branch. It's sitting in our federal and our state agencies. And the Democrats didn't do that, but they could have done it in 2020. I absolutely positively criticize and reject. Well, not totally reject. They could have gone after the FBI. Liz Cheney didn't, and the reason why they didn't, and I kind of understand why they didn't. And this is why there are back channels in the FBI. There are networks there. That political operatives like Cheney and others, and the Democrats, they're all the same. They use those too to take advantage of, and they're not going to get rid of them because there are times when they need them. But yeah, absolutely. It positively should have been done, and it wasn't. In 2024, it wasn't done. Biden had presidential immunity. He went ahead, and he just completely ignored it. He ignored a clear and present danger. Look, when you have someone who's convicted by the highest court in the state, a court of absolute, positive, general, and appellate jurisdiction, that did find that the person who's running for president is guilty of inciting a violent insurrection or rebellion against the United States, and you let him run for the presidency, and you let him run free, and you don't do anything? You're damn right. I find fault with you. And after the results of the election, Jamie Raskin, not only Jamie Raskin's kind of the constitutional scholar of the House, you could argue that he is. Any of our legislators could have done this. It should have stood up in the House and said, look, hello, 14th Amendment, Section 3, this man cannot be president. He is a priori means before the fact, disqualified. He for the sake of the argument, okay, he can run. He can get all the votes in the world. He can get the entire world to vote for him as president. He can't run. He can't serve. He's disqualified in the first instance. He's been proven in a court of general and appellate jurisdiction to have committed rebellion and insurrection against the United States, not merely legislative, like an auto golpe or a situation where what they did was they had false slates of electors ready and they needed Vice President Pence, who would have done it if anyone had told him there was a way to have done it. So don't exalt him that much. But who didn't do it because everyone said it was unconstitutional and he couldn't do it. To reject the electoral votes and throw the election back into the House. But also a violent insurrection outside, intimidating the Congress, a violent insurrection against the United States in which people were injured and in which people were killed. And they didn't do it. Nobody said anything. And when Acclamation Day came around January 6th, they didn't do it. Not one voice was raised. January 6th is the day the electoral votes are counted. And it forever, unfortunately, hereafter will be known not as Acclamation Day, but Insurrection Day, because that's when the insurrection occurred. And everybody knows it. So why wasn't anything done about it? Not one voice was raised. And when the matter came up before the Supreme Court, they just made stuff up. Oh, you can't. Oh, one state. How terrible. One state having the temerity and the obstreperousness to decide for the other 49 states whether a candidate can run for federal office. Oh, they can run for state office. They can do that in their state, but they're not allowed to do that when someone is running. And this is what the Supreme Court said. When they're running for a federal office, one state can't do that. This is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolute nonsense. And there's your corrupt, controlled, corporate Supreme Court. And no one stood up. And no one is standing up still. And now they participate to shut the nation down. They basically do. They shut the nation down. They shut the government down because now they've decided they're going to fight. And I ask you, isn't this kind of a day late and a dollar short? And I still say, well, better late than never. And I agree, better late than never. $880 billion going up towards $1 trillion in 10 years. Cut from Medicare, from the old people, the infirm, the elderly, the sick, the afflicted with age and other things incident to age. Cut from Medicaid for the people who, if they didn't have Medicaid, they wouldn't have health insurance of any kind, any other way. Cut from Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, not upwards of $1 trillion, that would be over $1 trillion, but reaching towards $1 trillion in its obscenity and its disgust, taking away that from the people by such luminaries as MAGA Mike Johnson, who represents, and of course, he's the Speaker of the House. We call him MAGA Mike. And he represents, I got to look it up, it's either Shreveport or Monroe or, that district there in Louisiana, whatever that is, in one of the poorest states. One of the states where per capita, more people rely on the social safety net. Louisiana is a taker state, but still a member of the union, entitled to those things by law. And now they don't get them? And MAGA Mike turning his back on his own constituency, those poor people, and MAGA Mike grew up poor, impoverishing already relatively impoverished people. More than they are, these people are pigs. And I'm referring to the MAGA Mikes and their ilk in the legislature, in the federal legislature. And they deserve to be called out as pigs. They are totally in thrall to this man, Donald Trump, and they deserve all the disdain, all the excoriation, all the disgrace that can be heaped upon them. But yes, I do blame the Democrats. This is not the time when this should have happened. They should never have let it get this far. And now it has to be done this way. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. Since I have material stacked up for like 3 shows. I actually don't know how much time I have left. I wanted to talk about this because, we're in the middle of a shutdown, that this shouldn't have happened, the 14th Amendment, which is kind of a catch-all. The way I talk about it, it sounds like a catch-all amendment, doesn't it? But it basically has several important clauses in it. And one of the clauses is that the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. You don't do a government shutdown. You pay the debt. And you might say, Jake, well, isn't this spending that's going? No, this is money that's already been spent. This is a debt, and you pay the debt, and that's the problem. And that's why this is so impactful with lenders and rating organizations, because the credit worthiness of the United States actually calculatedly goes down when these kinds of things happen. They used to be AAA. Now, because of Trump and his first administration and the 35-day shutdown, it's gone down to AA. And who knows what the bond rating will be and the creditworthiness of the United States will be after this one. We'll have to see. But what I did want to do is I wanted to talk about finance. I wanted to talk about what this is all about. And you know, I've talked at length, those of you who listen to the show regularly, I've talked about the palace coup that occurred in June and July of 2024 that caused that Harris should become the Democratic nominee. And she had what? Maybe 4 months to do a campaign, and she almost beat the guy in the popular vote. Trump only won the popular vote. He, of course, likes to say it's a landslide. This is just not true. At the best, calculating the ratings that favor him the best, he won by 1.5% of the popular vote. People don't want him. He's a minority president. They don't want him. But one of the reasons that there was this palace coup and that Biden was pointing out, see, that there's truth and then there's truth. There's the things that the controlled, corrupt corporate media is willing to tell you or is willing to represent, whether they're true or not. And then there are their real reasons. And the real reason why there was this palace coup, the real reason why Biden was forced out is because the oligarchs did not want to do what Biden was proposing. So let's talk about that. He wanted to do something that I call the 25-28-28 plan. And the 25%, and this is what it would be. And this is why the oligarchs didn't like it. And you know why the oligarchs didn't like it? Because it would make them pay their fair share. And let's spend some time talking about what this is so that you get an idea of this. We're in a government shutdown right now. Money is the big issue. Let's talk about that. So there are three levers to this. The first is a 25% corporate book alternative minimum tax rate that you could avail yourself of if you wanted to go the easy route. If you're a corporation, you pay 25%. That's all you pay. And then the high corporate rate, that's number two. That's the second lever. And I know this is, don't try to stay with me. This is good stuff. This is really good stuff because you're going to see how this would have worked. And it still could work. You get the 28% corporate rate. That's the highest rate, the highest. And I always talk about how in the Eisenhower administration, the corporate rate was 90%. The top rate was 90%. We're talking about a top corporate rate of 28%. And you know, I haven't heard anything. I've done the research. I don't think the American corporations were hurting too much. And of course, you know, there's itemizations and there's deductions and everything. I'm talking about the top rate, and I'm talking about before you adjust with itemizations and deductions, but it was 90%. This is 28%, and they don't want it. This is the way you find out and the way you understand the way these people really are. I say to you, you know, you've got to give space in your mind to listen to and allow what Jake is saying to come in, that these people really want, and it's all about money to them. They really want to take the fullest advantage of the United States tax laws for their own benefit, and they really don't care about the good of the nation, and they really don't care about the people who are listening to Politics by Jake. And you say, you know, Jake is just so diametric and he is so unilateral, and boy, what an unpleasant. Listen, give space in your mind at least, will you? If you cannot embrace the darkness of what I am saying, give space in your mind that this actually might be the way it is, because I'm telling you, it is. So, all right, you have the 25%, that's your first lever, the corporate book alternative minimum tax that you can do. If you don't want to do that, you can do a 28% corporate rate, and that's before the adjusted gross. And then you have a 28, and this is powerful, because this is the way that I'm about to tell you that most oligarchs make their money this way. You have a 28% mark-to-market capital gain. And this would likely shrink 10-year deficits by around 1.7 trillion, and that's a low figure. And the high figure, and this is incredible, isn't this incredible? Would shrink the deficit to around 3.7 trillion before interest savings, with a 2.5 trillion mid case. So 1.7 is your low, 3.7 is your high, 2.5 is your mid case. This bends the curve. It doesn't balance it, but baseline deficits are about 21.1 trillion. Isn't this amazing? We're talking trillions. You know what a trillion is? A trillion is 1,000 billion. So baseline deficits are about 21.1 trillion over 2025 to 2034, because we're using a 10-year period on the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO's latest outlook. At the Biden plan, you're still looking at 18.6 trillion mid-case in cumulative deficits. It's lower, but not under control without more moves. But this is a good part. And where the savings come from is this. You have the corporate tax rate of 28%. That's 1.3 trillion over 10 years. Treasuries at near 1.4 trillion. Tax foundation basically 1 trillion. CBPP is 1.3 trillion. Peterson Foundation book minimum tax 25% from 15%. The ballpark is 0.23 trillion incremental. Biden's fiscal year 2025 sketched 15% to 21% at 0.137 trillion. Simple scaling to, I know this is tough and I appreciate you guys staying with me. Thank you very much. Simple scaling to 25% puts you roughly in the low 200 billions, acknowledging the nonlinearity behavioral effects. Now, the 28% mark-to-market capital gains would be 1 trillion. That's a cautious middle. That's a huge variance. It's a billionaire-only design, scored 0.5 trillion. Narrow versions as low as 40 to 80 billion, and the broad coverage is a flat 28%, could plausibly reach 1.2 trillion, but it's volatile, it's front-loaded. You also have an interest savings kicker. Lower primary deficit means smaller interest bill. The rule of thumb is from the CRFB's recent baselines. Getting to the primary balance takes around 5 to 6 trillion. Your mid case is 2.5 trillion, covers under half that gap. So you can expect, as a consequence of that, a plus 10 to 25% extra deficit reduction from interest savings over the decade. I'm not baking that into the headline that I'm talking about because rates jump around, but that's why I give you the range from 10 to 25%. That's an interest savings kicker, so it could be really good. So again, the Biden plan, 10-year scores, 28% corpus rate is the biggest reliable slug of revenue. It's well scored, relatively predictable. Raising the book minimum to 25% adds some, but it hits a small set of firms and scales imperfectly. The mid to market at 28%, that's the wild card. It curbs lock-in, can raise a lot, especially up front, but year to year, receipts will swing with the markets. Design details, in other words, like coverage thresholds, private asset valuation, loss carrybacks, determine whether it's a steady engine or a roller coaster, and that's just something that's just going to have to see. But this is my point. And thanks for staying with me, because I know this is dry stuff. It's not the stuff that you want to hear from Politics by Jake. But it's important, we need to go over it. So the bottom line on this is that Biden's 25, 28, 28, it's a real down payment. It's material deficit relief. It's not a cure, but the lenders are going to look at that and they're going to be heartened. They're going to feel good about that. To truly get deficits under control, which is to stabilize that or to hit a primary balance, you probably need another 3 trillion over 10 years in a mix of base broadening enforcement or targeted outlay changes, because the hill is that steep. Biden has always said, and he hasn't said too much about it, but when he talks about it, he says, well, you know, we've got these deficits and we're big and they're big and we've got to get them down. They're there. Stop putting your head in the sand and pretending that there's nothing going on. These deficits are big and they're there and they're not going away. And at this point, let's take a break. And this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And I wanted to talk about, we talked about Biden now, and I wanted to talk about what it would be under Trump. Well, actually, the Biden-style plan, there would be a revenue gain in the mid-case of $2.5 trillion over 10 years before interest. The biggest reliable chunk is going to be the 28% corporate rate, and that's going to be $1 to $1.4 trillion. The 25% book minimum adds a few $100 billion. Mark to market can be sizable, but volatile, and it's design sensitive. It means meaningfully lower full deficits, not by the primary balance itself. So the Trump plan is extend most of the 2017 tax cuts, and that's going to happen, unfortunately, because he's going to be in office in December of 2025 when they are supposed to expire, and he's going to extend them. And that's going to be around, it's going to cost, this is just really important. I know it's tough to listen to this stuff. It's going to cost $4.5 trillion over 10 years. That's a big driver up on deficits. Now, the universal baseline tariffs at 10 to 20%. It raises headline revenue 2.0 to 3.3 trillion over 10 years, depending on rate and durability. But it's an inflationary tax because tariffs don't work the way Trump wants you to think that they work. They're basically an inflationary tax on consumers and input. It doesn't erase the extension cost. The net effect still leans deficit worsening unless it's paired with real offsets. So this is a bunch of nonsense, is what I'm telling you. Non-defense discretionary cuts and agency rolls back, which is what Doge is doing. It targets about 22.6% below current year base. Project 2025 style execution also targets civil service and oversight. These moves shrink visible programs fast, but they don't touch the big drivers, which are healthcare, Social Security, and interest. You get service cuts, and I would say interest. I'm not going to weigh in and say, oh, interest is bigger than Social Security or healthcare. Interest is big. Interest on the debt, that's huge. You get service cuts, you get governance risk more than durable savings. And what this adds up to is a $4.5 trillion extension, around 2 to 3 trillion in tariffs, uncertain cuts that largely miss mandatory spending. You get higher deficits rather than status quo. You don't lower the deficits as you did under the Biden plan. You get more economic friction from tariffs, fewer guardrails from weakened oversight. The Congressional Budget Office flags that unpaid tax cuts ultimately reduce person-to-person income, or I should say per-person income, once you factor debt and rate effects. So this is just dumb. It always was done. Using a shutdown to force agency cuts, which is what's going on right now, defunding the Inspectors General Council, aligning with Project 2025. This is Kevin Roberts. This is the Heritage Foundation. It's a slash first, govern later approach. That's ideology forwarded and budgeting backwards. The Biden plan is steadier. It pays for heavy, trims the deficit curve, and likely adds some interest savings on top. It's not a full cure, but it leans towards fiscal repair. Trump's plan, bigger permanent tax cuts first, then tariffs and blunt program cuts to backfill. The math does not balance. Even generous tariff assumptions don't offset the TCJA extension, and the discretionary cuts can't neutralize the long-run drivers. Deficits will rise. They will not fall. Plus, there's going to be more inflationary pressure partly because of the tariffs and weaker oversight. So, see, Trump repeats this fallacy that China, he says, oh, China's paying the great they're not. They don't pay tariff money. They don't pay tariff money to the U.S. This has not happened. It does not happen. It will not happen. He recently tried to throw something out like, oh, once we get more money from China through the tariffs, which is a fairy story. That's me talking. And followed up by saying, we'll use that money to help out our wonderful farmers. Yeah, right. Listen, don't hold your breath, farmers. And you remember the 2nd of April, that was Liberation Day, it was Tariff Day, the day when the biggest massive tax increase on the American people ever went through, because these tariffs are not paid by China. They're paid by the importers. To get that stuff out of custom, you've got to pay the duty. And then you've got to either swallow that and take that out of your workers and your dividends and whatever else you've got. Or you've got to raise prices. And remember how adamant Trump was that he wanted to intimidate Amazon and others from daring to show the prices, because Amazon did that. They did that next to their products that they were selling, how much it would be additional because of the tariff. Because these things are passed on to the consumers, typically, or the other things that I described, but typically onto the consumers. And, Trump was going to punish Amazon because they dared to show that his plan is full of nonsense, is full of beans. No, and I really do, and I'll end the show on this. You've heard me say, in certain instances, tariffs are great, and I would be for them. A protective tariff, that's a good thing. And in the 19th century, you have that. That's basically the American system. They're narrowly tailored. They're carefully tailored industries you want to foster and build up. Your infant industries, they need a protective tariff to prevent foreign dumping from strangling in the cradle, and that's what was done. That's what Abraham Lincoln explicitly believed in. Matthew Clay, Henry Clay, the whole Republican Party. That was protective tariff. That was the American system. National Bank, protective tariff. In infrastructure. Transcontinental Railroad, protective tariff. Erie Canal, protective tariff. Things of this sort. So that was all evident. And then we had this monstrous thing behind the White House where Trump came up with these crazy things where he wanted to put tariffs on uninhabited islands. This is when the stock market began to dive. You think the markets are not listening when he says this crazy stuff? They're listening. It began to dive, a minus 10% dive in a couple of days. It scared the hell out of Trump. And it showed once again the taco phenomenon. Taco's an acronym. Trump always chickens out. This, as we mentioned before, this is when Robert Armstrong of the Financial Times, which is a London periodical, on 2nd of May 2025, said, in financial circles, we now have a taco theory. Trump always chickens out. And I mentioned, I think, in the last show, that the problem with this is that it's a way it can be interpreted as a way to tell business leaders, you don't have to worry about this stuff. You don't need to fight back. You don't need to counterattack. You don't need to criticize to expose, because it'll all change. It's like the weather. It's just always changing. Now, I think this is wrong. You've got to know which is which, because you can't sit back and count on that Trump is going to chicken out, that he's going to taco. It's just too dangerous. And in the polls, when you look at them, only 36% approve of the tariff regime. The rest of them disapprove. And you'll excuse me, I may have talked about this on a very recent show, but it bears, as I said, but it bears repeating anyway. It was in the London Financial Times, May 2nd, 2025. Robert Armstrong, one of the journalists, I believe, some kind of an editor at the Financial Times. So this is the Wall Street Journal of the world. This is the Wall Street Journal from the city of London. And it spreads out internationally, I think, rather more than the Wall Street Journal. So anyways, 2nd of May, 2025, Robert Armstrong had just observed how Trump came forward with his lunatic tax program or tariff program, and of course, gaslit, mendacious, prevaricating. 2nd of April, he came up with the tariffs, and by the end of the week, after the stock market had gone down 10%, 10% in 2 days, Trump had to take it back. And at this point, Robert Armstrong of the Financial Times coined that famous phrase, the taco theory. So that's where it comes from, the tariffs debacle. So basically, that's the end of our show. We thank you for listening, but we will be back soon, and join us for that. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Are you tired of the noise and the spin? Do you want the real story behind the headlines? I'm Jake, and this is Politics by Jake, where I tell you what they won't. And now, we're going even deeper, and I need your help to keep doing it. Join me on Patreon and support independent political analysis that doesn't pull punches. You'll get insider breakdowns, you'll get bonus clips, and first access to new content. So go to patreon.com/politics by Jake. That's patreon.com/politics by Jake. No filters, no fluff, just the truth. Let's do this together.